I did a video called Right Wingers Are Useful Idiots. And now it's the liberals' turn. They're just as bad. We'll look at two things. We're going to look at this article by Molly Malloy, talk about femicides is a myth. And then we will look at this, the Grievance Studies affair. This is left wing. They have embraced feminism and it is coming to roost and they don't like it. But of course, like the right wingers, these guys are not going to say it's feminism. That's why they'll call it grievance scholars instead. Now let's get into this. These people are getting embarrassed by the feminists writing these quote unquote academic papers that make them look bad. So let's hear it.
Pros have been writing intentionally broken academic papers and submitting them to highly respected journals in fields that study gender, race, sexuality, and similar topics. We did this to expose a political corruption that's taken hold of the university. By this point,
they say political corruption, but notice they don't say who, what politics, what political movement, right?
Several of these papers have been accepted in highly respected journals, and one that claims that dog humping incidents can be taken as evidence of rape culture has been officially honored as excellent scholarship. I'm not going to lie to you, we had a lot of fun with this project.
Yeah, it's been accepted, and these guys have a problem with it. It's making them look bad. But the simple fact is, feminism is a hate movement and is also about giving women free stuff at men's expenses. So it's a make work project. These women who haven't earned anything, who don't know anything, get to write these bogus papers and have them accepted. And so they're probably getting paid for it too. So they're getting a free ride for man hatred, because that's what all these gender studies are about. They know it. Now I'll get past the fake laughter because I don't find anything like this funny.
But don't let that lead you to believe that we're not addressing a serious problem. If you have a few minutes, I'll try to explain. To be clear up front, we think studying topics like gender, race, and sexuality is worthwhile.
There you go. They love doing back in feminist, right? These gender studies, do they ever show women in a bad light or men in a good light? Never, exactly. So, and they know themselves that if something comes out that isn't flattering to the opposite sex, the female sex, they'll block it.
Getting it right is extremely important. The problem is how these topics are being studied right now. A culture has developed in which only certain conclusions are allowed, like those that make whiteness and masculinity problematic.
Exactly. So he just admitted it. Of course, like the right wingers, these left wingers are going for the race baiting. They know it has nothing to do with race. Nothing at all. These girls, they despise men of all races. So it's only about the gender.
The fields we're concerned about put social grievances ahead of objective truth. So as a simple summary, we call the problem grievance studies.
There you go. These feminist articles, and they're admitting they're feminist, they call it grievance studies. And guess what? Looks at glaciers, gender, and science, a feminist glaciology framework for global environment change research. So it has feminist in the title, yet they're going to call it grievance studies.
To test the depth of this problem, my collaborators and I dedicated ourselves to a 1 to 2 year secret project targeting top grievance studies journals with an agreement to publicly release our findings, no matter what the outcome. We started officially on August 16, 2017, and by Thanksgiving we were in trouble. We had begun ambitiously and mostly stupidly. Our first papers were really only suited to test the hypothesis that we could penetrate their leading journals with poorly researched hoax papers. That wasn't the case, and we were wrong for thinking we might be able to. So by late November, it looked like all we'd accomplished is ruining our reputations.
If this doesn't achieve anything, it would actually frighten me.
We needed to change our approach, so we walked back from the hoaxing and began to engage with the existing scholarship in these fields more deeply. This led us to learn a lot more about the inner workings of grievance studies.
The best I can tap into is that there's this kind of like religious architecture in their mind where privilege is sin, privilege is evil, and they've identified education as the place where it has to be fixed.
Of course, because these women love to get into education. It's a safe, clean office environment. And the feminists are smart. They know that they want to educate the minds of people. And notice he talks about it being a religion. It's not a religion any more than the Nazism is a religion. Notice they're always switching up the words. They're always getting it wrong. Purposely, I'd say.
So you can come up with these really nasty arguments like let's put white kids in chains on the floor at school as an educational opportunity. And if you frame it in terms of overcoming privilege, and then you frame their resistance, that they won't want this to happen to them, that they would complain about this. If you frame that in terms of, oh, they only complain about that because they're privileged and they...
Have you ever read a feminist article ever? Of course. Also, these white kids, they want to chain. Will any of them be female? Will any of them be girls? No. White girls are the most privileged creatures on the planet, and yet they are not considered privileged. You know, if I was the kids, I'd be telling this guy, you know, you're something, you're a white male. Yeah, that's what I'd do if I could drum up the university guys. We'd come to him and say, you know, we like this paper about chaining white people, white men. Two things. We want to chain you to a toilet in the men's bathroom stall. We would see how he reacts to that. That would be my experiment.
They can't handle it because their privilege made them weak. Then it's right in.
Papers started getting in.
You've got to be shitting me that this happened.
By March, with 2 papers accepted and 1 published, it would be fair to say that we had become accepted grievance scholars. By June, it was 3, with 1 having been officially honored by the journal as excellent scholarship. By July, it was 5. By August, 7. This shouldn't have been possible. So far,
Why shouldn't it have been possible? Like, how naive are these people? They want to be seen as good people while they're back in this hate movement. And this hate movement is making, free, work projects for man-haters. And they're always so surprised.
what we're learning is rather astonishing, but the data we've gathered require more analysis to fully comprehend. What appears beyond dispute is that making absurd and horrible ideas sufficiently politically fashionable can get them validated at the highest levels of academic grievance studies.
Again, how are they politically fashionable? How are they politically fashionable? What politics? On behalf of editors of Affiliate Women and Social Work. Yeah, right. Feminism up here. See how slimy these people are? They are no different than the right-wingers. They switch up the words so they never have to take responsibility for what they've been supporting for decades.
We rewrote a section of Mein Kampf as intersectional feminism, and this journal has accepted it.
Exactly. And appropriate. So they just reworded Mein Kampf, and the feminists have accepted. Yes, that is living proof right there that the term feminazi is entirely appropriate. But notice these guys are always so shocked, like their brains will never click together 2 and 2.
Social work.
This is deeply concerning. because the work of grievance scholars goes on to be taught in classes, to design educational curricula.
Not grievance scholars, you coward. You're showing on the screen women and feminists. Jeez.
To design educational curricula, to be taken up by activists, to influence how media is produced, and to misinform journalists and politicians about the true nature of our cultural realities. No one tolerates this sort of corruption when they find out an industry is funding biased research to make itself look a certain way. The same scrutiny should apply to research when it pushes a political agenda. And we have uncovered enough evidence to suggest that this corruption is
Yeah, okay, so they've uncovered enough evidence, but the simple fact is you wouldn't need to uncover it. All you have to say is feminism, which you know is a hate movement, has infiltrated the universities. They've seen these young guys get kicked out at a woman's word with, in kangaroo courts. So these people are pathetic. And actually, I find them nasty.
pervasive among many disciplines, including women's and gender studies, feminist studies, race studies, sexuality studies, fat studies, queer studies, cultural studies, and sociology.
Yeah, women's studies and gender studies. Exactly. And queer studies, we all know the feminists have taken over the LGBT. They are in charge. The women have always been in charge there. So almost everything he's mentioned, he could have just said feminist, period.
You may be thinking that the work done in these fields must be good, because it seems to continue the noble work of the civil rights movement. Well, after having spent a year immersed in it and becoming recognized as experts in it, we have to disagree. Grievance studies does not continue the work of the civil rights movements. It corrupts it, and it trades upon their good names to keep pushing a kind of social snake oil onto a public that keeps getting sicker. Progress is easier without.
Why are these dishonest people showing Donald Trump? Donald Trump is not connected to this whatsoever. He is not forcing women to write up these terrible articles, these man-hating articles, and then give them a free ride, get paid for it. Showing Donald Trump is completely dishonest by these people. They're shifting the blame, just like the right-wingers do. Okay, now we're done with them. We'll look at the Texas Observer. This young lady, Molly Malloy, she talks about femicide being a myth. Wow. Let's say, are these words big enough? Yes. Now, for years, a specter hung over I can't say the first word, Ciudad Juarez. In the 1990s, the largest city in Texas-Mexico border became infamous for gruesome femicides. The murders of hundreds of women. The murders held to be predominantly mysterious and sexual in nature. Notice they're always sexual, right? Grew in the public's imagination. Juarez developed an international reputation as a place of horrific violence against women. A reputation that has become internationally dominant narrative about the city. And this is what I'm talking about, this liberal, this feminist liberal. Her grievance is that it's making her city look bad. It's not that it's untrue. It's not that it attacks men. It's simply that she lives in the city and it's making it look bad. The femicides of Juarez have spurred activism in the academic study and became a major part of artistic and cultural depictions of life in Juarez. From Tori Amos' song, Juarez, to Robert Bolaño's novel, 2666, to FX's recent drama, The Bridge. Some who write about the femicides speculate wildly. about the source of the violence, suggesting the killers belong to street gangs, organized crime syndicates, powerful families. Those are the elites, by the way. Satanic cult, an underground snuff film industry. Oh, yeah. So blame the porn industry, right? The police. Right. Or all the above. The killings they claim are sexual, brutal, commonplace, and all above inexplicable. It's only inexplicable because they can't explain it because it's obviously not true. That's a narrative that Molly Malloy, a research librarian and professor at New Mexico State University, finds deeply troubling. Malloy has studied Juarez for 2 decades, has written for the Nation, Phoenix News Times, Narcos News Bulletins, and Texas Observer. She's also the force behind Frontera List, an invaluable and long-running repository of raw information and discussing about the border issues. Okay. In recent years, he's become increasingly convinced that the commonly accepted story of Juarez femicides is a myth. Well, duh. Of course it's a myth. Anyone with common sense or willing to admit the truth, there's no such thing as femicides. There's never been a case where any group has gone out to kill women in large numbers. The closest thing would maybe the witch trials, and even those killed men as well. And of course, like, again, I'm going to point out the only reason she has a problem with this is because the city she's in is something she cares about. While violence has extracted a horrific toll in the city, Malloy says the proportion of homicides with female victims in Juarez is less than it is in many American cities. What's more, she says, the sensationalistic narrative of the sexual murders of young women in Juarez distracts Americans from the real social dysfunction experienced in Mexicans living near the border. It's a contention that's been hotly contested by others who write about femicides. But Molly says careful study of Juarez paints an unambiguous picture. So to recap, it's in contention with other people who write femicides, because what's going on here is they're all in agreement that everyone's out to get women. But when it makes her city look bad and they're starting to trash her city, now it's an issue. I'm telling you, these people are all the same. Liberals want to think that they're good people, but they're not. They're not any better than the right-wing scumbags. Here she is, Molly Malloy. Female murder victims have never comprised more than 18% of all the overall murders of number of murder victims in Juarez. So if it's 18%, that means what are the other 82? They're all a man, right? And I suspect if they would never admit that, they would probably break the male population down by race or an ethnicity or something to make it the number smaller. In the last 2 decades, that figure average at less than 10%. That's less than United States, where about 20 to 25% of the people who are murdered in any given year are women, which again just means that 75 to 80% of the murders are men again. Whereas is experienced profound social distress and the elevated violence of the city and continual crisis. But the idea that Juarez is a place of disproportionate violence against women is a misperception. Yeah, I agree with that. And I agree with that. I'll just keep saying it over and over again. She only cares about this because she has something to lose. It's someplace that she lives, and she wants to live in a place that's doing better. And of course, she's going to do this debunking now in self-defense. Now, look, when you look at the 427 murders, that's the figures usually quoted for the number of women killed between 1993 and 2007. those are all the female murder victims. Those are not categorized by the type of crime. If a woman is shot in a robbery, it goes into that number that is categorized by some as a femicide. Yes, of course. Even though there would be nothing to indicate in that crime that she was killed because she was a woman. If you look at any of them, none of them, there would be 0 women for femicide. No one is ever killed because she's a woman. There was a famous case in 2004 that Mexico reporter Sandra Rodriguez wrote about in her book, La Fábrica del Crimen, of these young boys who murdered their family, mother, father, and sister. The mother and sister were counted as femicides, even though it wasn't gender-specific crime. Duh. At this point in the game, duh. Of course. She's finding out stuff we've known for a long time, or anyone could know if they just looked. And the reason they don't look is because they want to believe. They want to demonize men. So let's say, I skipped a lot of this because a lot of it's not really relevant or pertinent to what we're saying. I have a problem, Malloy says, with extreme focus on women victims. I think every single one of the victims matter. The fact that a crime or homicide victim is a woman, a child, or a man, it makes a different story. But in human terms, no victim should be more highly valued than another. Sorry, these are crumbs. This is a feminist. She admits she's a feminist, throwing crumbs. It's affecting her. And so now she wants to bucket and say, oh, we're all for humanity. I'm not just for women. If 300 people are killed and 30 of them are women, but the women's murders are the ones that get all the attention, I find that to be absolutely mistaken and wrong. Well, it's kind of late now to say it, to me. Now, not every woman victim is killed for some sexual reason or simply because she's a woman. I would say she's never killed just because of a woman. Even the domestic violence they try and trump up, it's not because she's a woman. She's because the guy's wife or whatever. The sexual is almost rare too. Sometimes people say to me, well, the women are innocent. The men that are killed are narcos and criminals. That's such an oversimplification. Of course, the word oversimplification is wrong. It's not oversimplifying it. It's just plain out wrong. These women are not innocent. Take a crime where there's a gang hit against another one, and they kill the guy, the male criminal, and his girlfriend. His girlfriend is not innocent of anything. She spread her legs for that guy. She went there. She knew he was a criminal, and she supported the fact that he was doing criminal enterprises because he, as a male criminal, has to bribe her. And so that's why he became a criminal. And she accepted the bribe. These women are not innocent. And it is a statement that made with absolutely no evidence. It is a criminalization of a great majority of all the homicide victims. This is what has happened, especially since the number of murders exploded, whereas in 2008, and it is false. It's almost like we were fetishizing these dead women. No, you're not. This is wrong too. You're not fetishizing them. You're deifying them. A goddess got killed, so something has to be done about it. To always be looking back at these women as if they're by some kind of sacrificial host. See, she's getting it right now. I find that to be troubling in terms of our culture and our focus on life and death and what it means. In other words, if you were constantly focusing on women as if they're the symbol of suffering, you never move beyond that particular death. Look at the social conditions that gave that kind of life and that kind of death for so many people. Well, I don't know how much more we need to read this. Let's see. I've read things from feminist scholars. Okay, talking about the harvest of young nubile women. Yeah, of course. So She's admitting it. She's reading feminist scholars. She knows what they're about. I mean, the terminology becomes kind of sensual or sexual. Yeah. Malloy, if you took away a woman's sexuality as part of her identity, I think she would kill herself. I think she would do herself in, because that is basically the only way women seem to see themselves as. Some of the writing about these cases, I find to be pushing over the extreme and eroticizing the victims in a way that makes them appear a lot more helpless and powerless than women and whereas are. Oh, so she's doing the old, we're strong and empowered movement now. You always get this back and forth. They're strong and empowered, but they're also little victims that they're not to blame for anything that they do. Some of the writing makes the women appear as if they're just parading on the street to be picked off by predatory men. Of course, men are being demonized as predatory. I just don't think that this realistic depiction of life in place, like, again, whereas that's their problem, everyone. This Malloy person, it's because her city's being attacked. That's the only reason she cares. She's not a good person. Malloy, you are not a good person. Okay, I've read the rest of the article. It's not that pertinent to what we're talking about. But it just goes to show you that the liberals, they want to be seen as good people. And then they back this hate movement, feminist hate movement. And when it comes to roost, then they turn around and complain and relabel it so that feminism doesn't get blamed. They're no different than the right wingers. And that's what I have to say about this.